Okay, great. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. We're gonna go through, I think this is a good place for this specific session. And this used to be part of the career development curriculum, and that has since shifted. However, going into your first pair project, we feel it's pretty important to go over some of this stuff. So I dropped the slides in the channel if you want to follow along on your own. I'll also be presenting them. Yeah, I think similar to like classroom settings, like if you have a question, raise your hand. If I'm not answering your question in a prompt manner, then go ahead and unmute and just let me know, like, hey, I would like to say some words now. And I'm good with that. And yeah, this probably won't take up the whole hour, so we'll probably end up getting into the kickoff a little earlier than 2, and then giving y'all a little more time in the afternoon to kind of like get with your pair and start going through your DTR, which, if that sounds like a foreign acronym, that's fine. We're going to talk about it here. Okay. Cool. Yeah. This is kind of like just an agenda of what we're going to go over. I think I kind of switch this up. I'd love to like poll and like pull on the repeaters a little bit, and people that have been through this mod one time, and kind of get their perspectives on pairing before we kind of like jump in. But pairing is essential to how we program in like this 2021 year, and kind of like the way the industry is going. I mean, pairing, specifically remote pairing, is quite essential to being able to do this job well. Just about every interview these days is an example of remote pairing. And yeah, I just went through a process, a couple weeks ago. And I mean, your ability to communicate, to listen, and to like clearly explain yourself in a remote environment is like, I mean, it's essential. But and not just doing the job well, but showing someone else like, hey, I can do this job. Cool. Yeah, so with that, I think yeah, I want to open it up to some of the repeating students and just hear from y'all. Like, what advice do you have, or what maybe like takeaways do you have from pairing last mod you've been through, a pair project and a group project, a lot of time with whoever those humans were. So yeah, I'm opening it up to y'all, and yeah, let's start with Matt.
I got really lucky on both my pair project and my group project, and had really solid partners to work with. And it really enhanced the experience. So being able to learn from other people and just sort of see where different people are at or how they're tackling a problem is just a really nice opportunity. My suggestions are sort of the same concept, but in a few different points in the process. So the first one's using the DTR, like, and actually owning, like, let's say you have an obligation, like I have kids, or I make dinner with my fiance every night at 7 or whatever, like being clear about when you're actually available and when you're actually going to be able to work, or how maybe it's just like, I'm not productive more than 11 hours a day. So like, we need to cut off by X time, whatever that is. And then doing that later in the project. So just sort of like being open and honest about how things are going for you. And like my group project, we looked at our DTR about 3 days in, and we're like, hey, we haven't been following this and people are getting a little bit frustrated. Let's either change the DTR or follow it. And we ended up following it, and I think we're really successful. That's all I have.
Yeah, I love it. And so to kind of summarize that or synthesize, like establishing some clear boundaries and then putting those in the DTR, right? Like I have a boundary at 7 p.m. or like my mental cognition, like you're not going to like me past 8 p.m. That's fine to say. Like you are allowed to say that. And like I encourage you to say that if that's the case for you, or like I'm just not going to be available in the mornings because like that just doesn't work for me. Like you need to be available a reasonable amount of time, but it's okay to like set some boundaries. Yeah, so kind of like Matt said, the DTR is really important for, you know, holding one another accountable. Like, here's what I expect to get out of this project. Here's where my learning goals are. Here's where like my boundaries are. And then being accountable, like accountable to yourself, accountable to your pair, and holding them accountable as well. That's the bread and butter of like what that document provides and why it's so important. And kind of like what Matt said with like following up on the DTR. So it stands for define the relationship. And yeah, you might go in, you know, day one, a ton of energy and like no real boundaries like that you can foresee and be like, yeah, like I'm excited to work on this, you know, and like I don't really have any expectations as far as like, you know, when you'll be online, but I'm pretty much available whenever. It's like this is how they all start, right? Like yeah, everything's gonna be great. And then like 2 days in, you know, you haven't made as much progress as you like. You're not working together the way that you would had hoped, and maybe like some personal shit came up and like now you're like distracted too. It's like, okay, well that's a great time for like a re-DTR, right? And so what we would call this in the software world is a retro, where you kind of like look back on how the sprint is. So those are usually like 1 or 2 weeks. Y'all don't have that luxury here because like after 2 weeks, this project's gonna be done. So you kind of have to like look back at everything's sped up, right? That's the nature of Turing. So you look back the last 2 days. All right, what went well? What went poorly? What do we need to change in the DTR? Where are some boundaries that I didn't know I have that now I know I have? And like doing that. So I think that is something I want to encourage and like just put out there as like, yeah, you might do this afternoon and then need to do it again, you know, as early as like Wednesday morning. And like that's okay. Cool. Yeah, let's hear from Ted.
Oh yeah, I think it's touched on everything. Yeah, just like set a schedule, be agreeable, and like make sure to get your study time in, because especially for like the 4-person one that's going to come up in a bit, few weeks. I know that myself and a lot of people last mod were so focused on the project that study time wasn't really we weren't like studying, getting like practicing ICs and stuff eventually, and that wasn't good.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to remember is like, yeah, you have this project to do, but like if you don't know how to do the project, it's probably time to like do a practice independent challenge or do some Ruby exercises, right? Like if you're not sure how to progress on what the project is asking, it's like, okay, well, we could do this together paired and like work on the enumerables exercises together if we want. Or I might just say like, actually, like I need some time and space. Like I need an hour to myself to like, just like look at this stuff, go over what the project requirements are, maybe practice where I think like those requirements are matching up to the Ruby exercises, and take that time for myself. And like, you are the only one that knows both when you need that and what you need from that. So that's like, it's important to at least kind of set an expectation that like, hey, we're going to need to work independently, even though we have this group project. Like, let's be pretty like, let's be open to saying like, hey, I need a break, or hey, I need time to myself. And then maybe let's just schedule some of that self time in and be proactive about that, because that's like, y'all need time to practice doing things on your own, even though you're in this paired project. Cool. Yeah, let's hear from Blake.
I guess it's not as much of like an advice as much as like a cool tip. I don't know if anyone has used it, but the Slack interface is really good for paired projects, because the person that's navigating has the ability to kind of like draw and kind of do things that are interactive, so that it can help the person who's driving or so, and then you're not just sitting there just talking and getting bored and twiddling your thumb. So for like the pair project, I think at least worth giving it a shot. The Slack has a really cool interface.
Yeah, and so Blake's basically talking about like the screen sharing feature that Slack has built in, as opposed to like being on the Zoom call and using the Zoom interface, which I'll say like both of them have like an animation feature where you can draw on one another's screen. So that's like something that's available. And then there are uh, there are some like other tools where like you can like basically both be typing at the same time in someone's editor. I believe like the tool is called Tuple, but let me just make sure. Yeah, the best pair programming tool. I'll drop this. So full disclosure, I haven't used this. I don't use this. And people have told me like this is a great tool. So that's like kind of take it for what that is. And I think like if you find it useful, great. Like if you don't, then such is life, then don't use it. But drop that in the channel so that you know. There's other things that there's one other thing I maybe want to mention called, I want to say it's called Teletype. Yeah. This is like a way that you can like work on code together within Atom. Full disclosure, I have not used this, and it's something I have been told is also useful. So these are like just some tools, and then plus you have like obviously like screen sharing and doing driver navigator, which we're gonna like talk about a little bit here. All right, anyone else have like what do I want to say? Things they want to mention. Yeah, JJ, go ahead.
I'm just going to say it's very important for everybody to fully understand each part of the project before you move on, because there'd be times where somebody would know how something was working and the partner didn't understand, and then it just causes this domino effect. So if you have questions or if you don't understand why somebody wrote something that way, definitely do your best to fully understand it before you move on.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Like if you don't understand the foundation that, you know, some code is built on, then you can't really progress like on top of that code if you're already like, this doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to be like, hey, like you wrote this. I know you get it. I know you've explained it. Like, can we try that again? Or maybe like, could we bring in like an upper mod like as like a mediator that like can help us as you explain the code, like tell us about it, or maybe a mentor and like something, or maybe an instructor or another student that could like maybe like help out with the explanation piece if like things aren't linking up. Because just being like, okay, not saying anything and then moving on is not in your best interest. So just say that. Cool. All right, moving on. Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the DTR, and yeah, this idea of like defining our own expectations in a working relationship. Like, how do we work best together, and how do you work? How do you like to work? Yeah, this like relating style thing is we're not going to dive too deep into it. But yeah, the biggest thing is like we're gonna have a DTR that we expect y'all to like do this afternoon and send us a link to. You could do this as like a gist, you could do it as a Google Doc, like whatever, doesn't matter. We'll give you a template and we just expect you all to go through it and kind of like fill it out with one another. Cool. Yeah, moving on. Yeah, I've already kind of said why pairing is a focus. Necessary for the professional world, necessary for you to work effectively with others, and might as well practice here and make sure that like you are as prepared as you can be for the professional world by doing pair projects here. And just so you know, there'll be one pair project and one group project for each of the first 3 modules. So when those happen will maybe be a little bit different each mod, but you'll have at least one pair project at least one group project every module. So you get plenty of practice at this. Yeah, let's take like 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes on your own and just kind of think about like, all right, like let's think about my best teams. Let's think about my worst teams. What did those look like? And then I'll hear from a couple of y'all. So maybe 3 minutes actually. Yeah, let's come back together at like 19. All right, let's come back together. I'd love to hear from a few of you. Anyone have like some positive team memories that they want to share, and maybe some reflections on what made those positive team experiences? Great. Let's go with Koi.
In the past, I felt that when my team had like an environment where we were able to just like speak openly and freely and like share our opinions and stuff like that, and be able to bounce like a lot of ideas off each other and talk about them. I think that's always been helpful to success.
Cool. So the idea of like having free flowing ideas within a space, and what I'd say are paramount to getting to a place where there is that space, is trust, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be some level of trust that like, even if I share an idea that maybe isn't the right idea or isn't my best idea, that this is kind of like an area where I'm allowed to do that without like having, judgment or being ridiculed because of that. Like we can discuss like why it's not the best idea or why it is the best idea, but no one's going to be like right out the gate like, yeah, that idea is shit and we're moving on. Like that's not a great approach, right? So I think like thinking about, we're going to get into this a little bit more, this idea of psychological safety, and like that is an idea that I want y'all to be working towards in all spaces, right? I'm working towards helping foster it here in the classroom, and I want you all to be working towards fostering it in breakout rooms, when you're working in a pair. And the way that you do that, a lot of aspects that go into it, but truthfully, it's like, all right, I see you as a human being. I recognize you. Your ideas are just as important as mine. And I want to make sure you have all the space you need to communicate those ideas. And I'm also open to, getting feedback when I'm, maybe not being my best, at creating a psychologically safe space. And I'm open to like hearing how I could do better, essentially. And that's like a big part, at least for me, of like creating that space. Cool. Yeah, how about an example of when things didn't go as well? Anyone have something they'd like to share with that? Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I think like in the past I had one really bad experience where like somebody in my group just wasn't participating, but then like they would kind of get mad that they didn't get to contribute any ideas either. And so it was sort of this like constant tension of that person didn't show up like to group time. They didn't bring their ideas. They didn't think about things ahead of time. They weren't enthusiastic about the project, but then they would still get like defensive and upset that they didn't get to do as much for the project. And it was a really tough thing to try and work around.
Yeah, that sounds pretty challenging as an experience, and having someone there. I think like thinking about that's like probably an experience where a crucial conversation could have happened and didn't, right? Where it's like, all right, clearly this isn't working. This person feels like their ideas aren't heard. We feel like they're not showing up the same way we are. So let's have a crucial conversation. And the idea with those are like, hey, first thing we want to do is come into the room knowing like there's going to be a statement of facts, and like this is going to be a tough conversation. Like we know that from the beginning. Like this isn't going to be, the easiest conversation. So let's state the facts. Hey, you didn't show up to this meeting, you know, I could tell you didn't do the pre-work that we had expected to be done by this meeting. So the story that I'm telling myself when I see you show up to a meeting like that is, they don't, this person doesn't care about the group as much as I do. This person doesn't care about the project as much as I do. And that's the story I'm telling myself, like what actually happened, or how did you see this happen? And then you give the other person a chance to explain themselves. Like, the statement of facts is there. It didn't show up, or you weren't prepared. And that's okay. Like, right. Like that's the statement of facts. But then it's like, what actually happened? And maybe they say, well, you know, like I'm having a lot of problems with my partner. That day we had a big fight, and I just like, you took up a ton of my time. I was super distracted. And no, I wasn't there prepared. And I wasn't like my best self at that meeting. Yet I still want to contribute to this project. I just couldn't that day. Okay, now we can see what happened here, right? Like now we have a very clear vision of here's what happened, here's why it happened. Everyone's on the same page, and now we can move forward at least. If there's lingering tension in the room that hasn't been addressed, how are we going to move forward? It's just not going to happen, right? It just isn't. So that's my kind of like building into some of these next slides. That's crucial conversations coming a little bit later. Yeah, setting some expectations. We've been going like 25. Let's take a quick break. Let's take 5, come back at 30, and then we'll finish this out. It's 30, so let's come back together and finish this up. Yeah, so essentially, you're all going to be doing remote pairing. You know, maybe, I mean, on the off chance that you happen to be in the same city and you all want to meet up in person, like maybe there's that chance that that happens, but likely that is not the case. But you can do both of these, like driver navigator and like ping pong styles. You can do those remotely. So I'll kind of tell you how driver navigator is first. So this morning, when we were in evals, you were likely the driver and your instructor was likely the navigator, right? You were driving the code, you were typing, or, you know, putting up sharing your screen and putting the panes up. And I, as the instructor, was like, hey, do this now, or hey, can you do this now? So that's like driver navigator, right? The driver is typing the code, essentially. The navigator is telling them what to type. And the key thing to be aware of in this type of pairing relationship is the driver cannot drive without the navigator. So if the driver starts typing, the navigator didn't tell him to do something, that's where this strategy goes kind of awry, right? Like it's like, all right, well, the navigator only has as much power as the driver, you know, gives them, which is hopefully 100% in most scenarios. The best thing you can do as the driver is you can be like, hey, I'd like to try this. Are you okay with that? Right. So you just do a quick check-in of like, all right, I don't think the navigator is going to do what I'm thinking. So, hey, I'd like to give something a try. Are you okay with that? Yes. Okay. Now you can like type some things and be like, okay, like let's pause and make sure that you understand what I just typed. That's okay to do. You just have to check in with that. So that's driver navigator. Driver shares their screen, does the typing, navigator tells them what they want them to do. Ping pong is an interesting approach. It works a little bit better in person, to be honest. It's like we're using the same computer and then we're kind of like passing it back and forth is the easiest way to do it. Obviously, y'all don't really have that option. So the way that you can do ping pong pairing is like, hey, all right, we're doing TDD here, right? So maybe we get one test to pass. And what we do is this is how you can really like work on your Git workflow as like part of this strategy. You can be like, hey, all right, I got, you know, one test to pass. Let's make a commit. Let's push this code up to GitHub. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen once I do that. You share your screen. Okay, let's watch you pull down my changes into your local branch from GitHub. And now you have you're up to date. And now your turn to start like being kind of like the driver, like, okay, now you're going to implement the code and I'm going to kind of like driver navigator is kind of built into that. But essentially you get one test to pass, you make the commit, you push it up. Now you switch who's screen sharing. the other person pulls it down from GitHub, starts working on the code, and you kind of back and forth, kind of pop, pop, pop. That's a great approach, I think, both to get your Git workflow down and have a bunch of practice at that, and to make sure that like one person doesn't feel like they're doing like too much of one thing, right? Like whether that's driving or navigating. Yeah, we're not going to answer these questions. We just don't really have the time. But any like thoughts or like comments on either style or either approach? All right. If they come up or you have some things to say later, that's fine. Just let me know. But moving on. Yeah, DTR, questions in template. Let's check this out. These are some, essentially like, these are the questions. It's like, hey, like, I think they can all kind of be summed up as like, what's your working schedule? How much time do you want to spend together? What does support look like for you, right? Like, I don't know how I can support you if I don't know how. Right? So like, what does support look like for you? And then what are your main goals coming out of this project, right? Like, what do you want to, like, at the end of these 2 weeks, like, where do you want to be technically? Where do you want to be as a communicator and as a pair programmer? Like, what are your goals for that? And then how can we like set some, accountability action items to make sure that we're like on track? That's obviously there's much more to it than that, like based on these questions. And there's this whole like remote setting thing. And this is the actual template. So like, there's plenty for you to guide here. You don't have to use everything, is what I want to say. You don't have to use everything on this template. Some things may not work for you. You may be like, that's not for me. That's okay. Like, but you have to use it. You don't have anything right now, so like you want to use some of this, right? So yeah, let me drop this link also just so you have it in the channel. But cool. Any questions on like why we do this DTR, what the importance is? Or yeah, Caitlin, you had your hand up, so go ahead.
I was just wondering, I guess going out of turning and you get a job, is there usually kind of a pair programming setup that companies have for you to easily jump in and kind of follow? Or is it more of just you defining how that would work based on who you're placed with?
I can tell you my experience is that there is not like a template or like a guideline to like how that happens. And that is unfortunate. And like, it's like a area where you could be like, hey, I've got some ideas how we can like, establish some trust here between developers, or establish a framework of like, hey, this is how we pair. Because you'd be surprised, but when you leave Turing, you will be ahead of a lot of the development world in terms of like how to pair and pair effectively. So know that that's a likely scenario, and some of the best companies do have that in place. So it's not like some of the best companies, like Pivotal, for instance, they do 100% pair programming. Like if you are on that team, you are 100% of the time pairing with someone else working through problems. So it's like they have a very clear pair programming framework and guidelines to follow. So it's kind of hit or miss, right? It's like you're gonna probably be ahead of most of the industry coming out of Turing in terms of how to do this effectively. And some places will have it in place as well of like, hey, this is how we do this, or this is how you like request to pair, like whatever that is.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else coming up with the DTR stuff that you have questions on? Okay. Cool. Yeah, what else should we consider? We've got this like DTR thing, but I think like this makes like it makes sense to like put this in place, but it's like, all right, well, now if we don't have a schedule or like any sort of actionable items to check in on this, like what is this even worth? Right? If you do the DTR and never look at it again or mention it again, like it's not that effective with the tool. So know that. Okay, so yeah, this is like one of the most common things, like really the most common fallacies that we hear from students. You know, my partner's better than me, and so I'm holding them back. And then, oh, my partner's not as good as me, so they're holding me back. And like, why that is not the case is because if you are, you know, more technically advanced at this point than your partner, then you get a great opportunity to solidify what you know by explaining code to others, right? You might know something and it might just click up here, but if you can't put it into words, you're going to really struggle in interviews, right? You're really going to struggle to show anyone what you know. So you need just as much practice communicating this as you do actually like typing it out and figuring out the problems. And then on the flip side of that, if you're the person that's like, I don't know which way is up right now because they've thrown all these like new concepts at me the last week and I'm kind of drowning, like, okay, like you need to figure out a way to articulate questions clearly and effectively. Like, okay, like here's what I do know about this problem. Here's what I don't know. Can you help me fill in the gaps here? And that is another process that takes a lot of practice and that you need practice at. So don't feel like one is holding back the other. Like there certainly are scenarios where one person could be holding the other back if they are like not showing up, not being fully engaged, like all of those things. But in terms of technical ability, like you could be top, like, you know, you've got this Ruby stuff in your sleep and you can do it in your sleep person. And then you could be like, hey, I just like figured out that Ruby is a language today. And like, that's all I know. And I'm telling you, you can still have an effective relationship together because you both get to practice different things. And in general, also, if you are the more advanced technical person, you should be navigating and the other person should be driving. The other person should be typing because like if you're the driver and you're more technically advanced, you're just going to have a tendency to speed it up. And like, that's not what we want. If the driver is the less technically advanced person and they can slow it down by like not typing because they don't know what you're saying, that's ideal. Cool. Questions on this? You're going to get paired with someone and it's unlikely that you are at the most even point of technical abilities, right? Someone's going to probably be more advanced than the other, and that's okay. All right. Moving on. Yeah, so these are like, this is kind of going back to like what I said about, yeah, you have this DTR, like how do you hold one another accountable? There's a set of meeting that you have every day. That's a stand-up. Essentially, usually in the development world, we have this, you know, at the beginning of the day, we're like, hey, this is what I worked on yesterday. This is what I'm planning on today. And then if you have any blockers, any things you can't get past, you kind of let the team know if you do. It's that simple. It can be a 5-minute meeting. It could be a 1-minute meeting. It could be a 30-minute meeting. It kind of just depends on like what happened the day before and what today looks like. But like having a check-in every day where you're not like, oh, we're diving into code. It's just like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. This is where I feel like we could have been better yesterday. This is what I hope to get out of today. Is that simple? Like that, like something there where you state expectations for the day. And then, you know, just having the space to be like, I think literally if you just ask one another the question of like, are we living up to our DTR every day, and invite the space for feedback of like, hey, here's how I think we could do better, or here's how I think we did well yesterday, then it's just going to be like, usually I see students do that at the very end of the project. And it's like, well, you could have just done that, a quick 5-minute check-in every day, and then got on the same page much quicker. So that's what I'll say about that. And then, yeah, just the idea that in remote settings, you know, we're dealing with like lag, some latency latency, like people like talking at the same time, and then it's like, oh, I didn't hear it. It's like, oh no, you go, I go. Like that shit's gonna happen. Like you gotta be okay with that happening, and just remember that you're gonna have to over communicate. You're gonna have to stop and create space more than you're taking up space if you want this to go effectively. Cool. All right. Yeah. Now this idea of crucial conversations. This is a nice quote, it's just not that great to use your voice when you're angry at the world, something in the world, your partner maybe, because yeah, you might speak passionately, but if the person on the other end isn't listening to you because of the way you're speaking, then like, what is it even worth? I think is what I get out of this quote. Yeah, so this actually, let me go back here. I made an update to this slide. Okay, now it's there. Cool. Great. So I think this idea of like, there's a chance expectations might be broken. So you have to have one of these crucial conversations. Like I said, you come in, you state the facts. All right, like here's what I know, and here's what I am feeling because of what I know. When you didn't show up to this meeting on time, or like, I didn't hear from you for 12 hours, and that makes me feel bad. Like maybe I did something wrong. Maybe you don't care about me. Maybe you don't care about this project. That's the story I'm telling myself, right? So you state the facts and you start with the, hey, here's how I'm feeling, not here's, how you need to be better. It's like, here's what happened and here's how I am feeling, right? You got to think about like, all right, like, has there been silence? Like, are there places where you can tell that one person is not communicating when maybe like we expect that there should be communication? And that is okay to state like, hey, like I need you to say more about how you feel about areas of code, because if you don't tell me, then it's hard for me to judge whether you like it, you hate it, or you don't understand it, or you do understand it. So I just need to hear from you more. I think that's okay to like ask for, like, hey, we got to over communicate in this remote setting, right? Like that's something you both should hold one another accountable for. The nonviolent communication framework, I'm going to drop one more link to the about page of this this organization that I think is like essentially a solid nonprofit. There's this this framework for communication, nonviolent communication. It basically says, hey, we are humans, we all have needs. And essentially when we're communicating, like we're all trying to attain one of those needs, right? And so if we have the compassion to know that, then it's easier for us to understand and have compassion for someone that maybe is like more emotional than we expect. And if we can kind of like have the compassion for them and like know that like, hey, like they're gonna like someone is, you're trying to like, they're trying to get a need, like whether they need to feel heard, whether they need to like feel loved, like whether they need, it could be a number of things. But like, if I have the compassion to like step back and think like, all right, it's probably not me, it's probably a need that they have that I am not fulfilling or is not being fulfilled maybe in their outside life, like I'll have a better understanding of how to communicate with this person. So all that to be said, that I'll drop this link and you can read a little bit more about this. It isn't the only framework you could take to like, communication. It is one that I think is effective, for deepening, understanding with one another and then like coming to conflict resolution quicker. Yeah, I think like this making assumptions piece, I'll just say like, every time I've ever made an assumption about something, I've generally been wrong and I've generally made things worse. That's just the fact. Fundamental attribution error. Honestly, I've kept this in there because I was like, I remember that this is like a cool thing, but like, I don't actually remember what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and look it up because I'm a dev and that's what we do. And yeah, let me pull this over. Yeah, you can track me. You can track me, Cookie. Okay. So let's just read this. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. So this is basically making personality assumptions based on situational context and like our uh, uh as humans, our fault is that we like do that more often. We're like, oh well, they're this type of they're a selfish person because they acted selfish in this like one situation, or my bias says they acted selfish in this one situation, and that's like just generally flawed. And there's a lot of like studies out there that say that. And yeah, we've got to consider the nuance of the situation or the environment more often than, oh, it's this type of person, that's why they're doing this, because that's just like a poor assumption. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Anyone have anything they want to add to this, or like maybe more familiar with it than I am and want to say something? Okay. Almost done here. Let me go back. Maybe. Oh, I see. And these Zoom controls always in the way. All right. Yep, I think I've like kind of talked about most of this, yeah, but not all of I didn't say it exactly how this slide does. It's like, hey, we want to ask for permission and speak in private. I think like, hey, I think we need to have like a crucial conversation about like how our pairing has been the last 2 days or one day or this afternoon, whatever it is. Hey, I think we need to like, have a conversation about like how we're working together and like revisit our DTR, right? So like just setting the tone and setting the norm that like, hey, I would like to have this. And I think it's okay to ask. And then like, coming at it with like, hey, I respect you as a human, and like I know that we're not doing as well as maybe we could be, and I'm like, all I'm trying to do here is get us to a place where we are working more effectively together, and like, let's state the facts, let's tell you how you feel, and then ask that person like, how do you want to respond to this? Like, here's what happened, and here's how I felt when that happened, and like, please tell me like what your thoughts are. That's kind of the idea. Cool. Yeah, so hopefully like y'all have some answers to these questions, but I'll just open it up and make sure that I'm not, just talking to myself here. So anyone, why is the DTR helpful? Yeah, go ahead, JJ.
To establish boundaries mainly.
Love it. Any other reasons? Yeah, Erica, go ahead.
It gives us a starting point. So like, especially if something comes up later, we can revisit that starting point and kind of make adjustments as needed.
Yep, love it. Absolutely agree. Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, it just helps set expectations for what you want and what your team, your group, your partner wants.
Exactly. Yep, love it. Kelsey, I assume that's what you were going to say as well. Cool. Yeah, any ideas of like when expectations, likely inevitably during your time at Turing, maybe not on this project, but at some point are broken, like what you will do and how you will approach that situation? Any ideas? Yeah, Henry, go ahead.
You can either discuss it at a stand-up or set up a meeting to talk about what's going on, and you can point to the DTR and be like, hey, we're not really following this. It'd be great if we can do what we promised each other that we would do in the DTR, and try and fix these issues moving forward.
Yeah, I love it. You can set up regular meetings like stand-ups where basically accountability is built into those meetings, right? Like that, that's something that you're going to talk about. Or you can say like, hey, like we need to have actually an extra like meeting that is, you know, based on whatever has happened the last few days. And this is going to basically be an accountability conversation with one another. And like, that's okay too. And those are, you know, I'm not telling you like these are the easiest conversations to have, but like the sooner you have them and the more practice you have at them, like the better you're going to be in the professional setting when these things, and they're going to come up, I can guarantee it. Okay, cool. I think that's it. Yeah, let's take like, I guess, and we didn't finish as early as I thought. So let's take 7 and we'll start back up at 2.